Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me Ted Shorter from Keyfactor. So Ted, if you want to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background.
Sure. Great to be on. Ted Shorter, I'm the CTO at Keyfactor. I've actually been with Keyfactor for almost 20 years. We got our start as a small consultancy in the machine identity and PKI space, and kept seeing the same unmet needs over and over again, which led to creating a small tool, which snowballed into what Keyfactor is today. We've been a software company since about 2008 or so, and it's been a really nice growth trajectory. Most of our customers are household names, banks, insurance companies, manufacturing, some of the biggest companies in the world, really. No one's heard of us, but everyone's heard of our customers.
Good position to be in, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, okay, so the kind of looming thing that's been talked about for a while, and now it seems to be a slightly more imminent, is the concept of post-quantum cryptography. And I know we've talked about the sky is falling for a decade now, that eventually someone's going to make a quantum computer and it's going to render all cryptography completely useless. So as we dive into that, let's start off, for those who aren't fully caught up, just kind of explain what is post-quantum computing. Why is it an issue?
Yeah. No, it is one of those terms that has been floating around for a long time as this kind of distant, nebulous threat. I think, just really quickly, quantum computing in general is the idea of exploiting some of the more bizarre properties of subatomic particles to perform computations. Those computations, it's interesting. I think there's been a lot of development around just quantum computing in general in the last 3 years, 2 years even. But don't think of a quantum computer as a really fast conventional computer. It's a completely different kind of computational device that is very good at some things and horrendous at other things. Like there's many things that most people expect a quantum computer will never be able to do that a computer that we have, all the ones that we're sitting here and using today can do. But there's a lot of great promise in some of the things that they can do very well. There's also a great threat in the fact that a sufficiently strong quantum computer could actually break RSA and ECC. So the other algorithms, things like AES, symmetric algorithms, hash functions like SHA-2, by and large, unaffected, or at least not affected nearly as much. But RSA and ECC would be significantly impacted and basically unsalvageable if a sufficiently strong quantum computer was created. I think the other thing that's happened is, this is something that I've been kind of tracking for a while. I used to work with a bunch of mathematicians for the government. I left that part out of my resume, but you can guess where that was. There's been a lot of, I know a lot of mathematicians. I'm not really I have a minor in math, but there's a lot of very smart math people that I know. And for a long time, I would say maybe half of them would say that quantum computing actually impacting cryptography, it will never happen, right? And then the other half said it's just a matter of time. I think what's happened recently is that there are a lot more folks, I'd say it's probably 95% or more, that now say it's just a matter of time. And that matter of time is getting closer and closer. So, I think there's a couple of different things from a timeline perspective, because it's gone from this sort of distant threat to something where Gartner is telling people you should be trying to be done with a transition to quantum algorithms sometime around 2030. The NSA has actually come out with their plans and vendor guidance, basically saying we don't want to buy things from you, from vendors, if they don't use quantum resistant signatures for firmware updates starting in 2025. So that's a month from now. And their whole plan is to be done by 2030 as well. So that gives you an idea of where they think this is going to happen. And then I think, we've done a lot of partnership work with IBM, and IBM is also building a quantum computer, and the term they use is cryptographically relevant. And they have it's a publicly available roadmap slide, and the quantum computer on the far right of that roadmap slide is cryptographically relevant. And they're kind of expecting to be there themselves somewhere between 2029 and 2033. So all of this is kind of tracking towards, something along the lines of a 5-year, 5 to 7, 8-year transition. I guess the other thing that's happened really recently, and is just to finish this thought, is 2 weeks ago, NIST came out. They came out with new standards for algorithms that can replace RSA and ECC, but they also came out with proposed guidance. It's not official guidance yet. They do drafts, public drafts for comment first, and then they solidify them. But the draft basically says, it basically cites to 2030 as the deprecation date for RSA and ECC. So you basically now have proposed standards as well, asking people to get away from RSA and ECC and onto the newer algorithms. And I think that what that's done is effectively, at this point, it kind of doesn't matter whether a cryptographically relevant quantum computer happens, in 2030 or 2040 or whatever. A lot of compliance frameworks and audit frameworks and all that take their lead from the government, and there's, for most folks, you're going to have to migrate to these new algorithms. Not because a quantum computer is actually there. Hopefully these things push you to do it beforehand, but it's, you're going to have to do it for compliance. Some version of PCI in the future is going to mandate the use of the new algorithms, much as it mandates certain versions of TLS and all that kind of stuff today. So that's a really quick sort of state of the union on where we're at, and it changes, on a weekly basis, right? There's new information coming out, new guidelines, so forth.
Well, and I think that was a really good explanation. I mean, it was very and even keeled. It's not it's not a sky is falling, and it's a fair point to say that even if we never see the kind of the fruits of the theoretical possibilities of quantum computing, we've already drawn the line in the sand from a cryptography standpoint. And so we're already marching towards that, as you pointed out. I was gonna say, going back, like I'm also not a mathematician or a physicist, but I know enough for a layperson, and I've always found the quantum stuff to be like, I can understand it at like way up here level, but if I try to think about it anymore, it just breaks my brain, because I'm like it's like Schrodinger's particle. I'm like, you're telling me it can be all the things at the same time, like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just fascinating too. I mean, one of the big principles that all of this quantum computing hangs on is the idea of entanglement and superposition and so forth. And what I think is, there's actually a lot of really good on PBS. If you ever get a chance to watch old PBS episodes, I think there actually might be a PBS one out now on just quantum in general, and not so much quantum cryptography or quantum computing, but just quantum physics. And I think, Einstein actually, it's this idea of entanglement. Einstein actually was one of the first to notice. They did these experiments, and they found this bizarre behavior of subatomic particles and so forth. They came up with mathematical models to represent what they were seeing experimentally. And then Einstein pointed out, like, hey, based on these models you came up with, he basically pointed this idea of entanglement and used it to kind of deride the whole thing. He called it, spooky action at a distance. And it took more to say, like, look, this can't actually be, and it turns out, of course, that now that they're actually able to do real experiments with this, it actually does work that way, and that actually underpins a lot of what we're talking about with quantum computing. It's just kind of an amazing, we're already at a place where Einstein was wrong, which is that didn't happen very often. So
yeah. like I say, it's interesting, but, and like, yeah, I mean, even going back to like, high school physics and stuff, it's like, I remember like, you can understand it at kind of a base level and say, okay, I get the general flow of what we're talking about. But when you dig in, you just kind of start going, oh wait, I don't how did
Yeah.
but let's get back on this topic.
Yep.
So you talked, we talked a little bit about the timeline, and let's I guess for the sake of this podcast, let's assume that these lines in the sand are there, for a reason, that they're fairly accurate, that, sometime around 2030, there will be, a quantum computer that can break RSA. Are there, in your mind, is this a general concern, or are there specific industries that are more at risk, like that rely on these things more so than others?
Yeah, I guess first, I'm kind of hoping that that it's not 2030, that 2030 is the date with a little bit of buffer factor in there, because I think that's the other thing we can talk about too. It's going to take most folks longer. We don't have as much time. We don't have that much time, right? The 25 years is actually a really short time. Just really, really quickly, like those of us who've been doing this long enough to have some gray hair remember moving from SHA-1 to SHA-2 in the cryptographic and PKI world. On average, the time between the time the standard was ratified for SHA-2 and the time that most organizations had actually transitioned to using SHA-2 was somewhere around 12 years. And we don't have that much time, right? The algorithms got standardized in August, and we definitely don't have 12 years for
Right.
any of those days. So I think, but yeah, I guess to answer your first question, that like a lot of things, there's a lot of work happening out in the open in the private sector. Like IBM is very transparent with what they're working on. Obviously other government organizations, both domestic and abroad, are less transparent with what they're doing, and so it's really unclear sort of what the absolute state of the art across the entire globe might be. But I think when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer first exists, it's most likely going to be in the hands of the nation state. And so as far as targets, you'd want to look at things that nation states might want to go after. But I think once you have something that you're talking about being able to break RSA and ECC keys in a matter of minutes or hours, so it doesn't have to be that expensive an asset, to make it worth putting that kind of time toward. The other thing I guess I'd mention is there's this concept of harvest now, decrypt later, which the idea being, okay, I can't break any of this stuff today, but I might be able to, or will be able to at some point in the future. I'm going to just gather a bunch of data. Storage is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and if there are still things being sent around encrypted that will still be valuable in
Yeah.
in 5 to 7 years, and there's certainly you can use your imagination to think of what some of those things might be. Then that's actually a threat that's happening now, right? There are there's indications from what we've seen, some folks talking about that there's certainly relatively easy to harvest information being sent encrypted over the internet at large, and to the extent that some of that can be still valuable information, in 2030, 2032, whatever.
Right.
That's a risk that's absolutely, that we're all basically subject to, even today.
Right. Well, so even on a much lower like security level in terms of complexity, with where there password breaches, data breaches all the time. Attackers get hundreds of millions of passwords from Yahoo or whoever, and generally speaking, the subhead is always, yeah, but they're all hashed, they're all encrypted, so you're good. But to your point, it's like, well, okay, they can't like, yes, it's great that it's hashed, so they can't just like look it up and go, hey, what's Tony's password? But with a little bit of effort, they can figure it out. And if they can't figure it out today, 5 years from now, they might have a computer that could figure it out. So it's kind of that same principle of like, but at least with the password, hopefully in 5 years, I've changed my password, which is not
right.
which is not necessarily as true for an RSA ECC key.
Yeah. Well, I think that, the bigger things too are, files, data, things going over VPNs. There's a lot of relatively sensitive things that are being sent encrypted over, WANs and things like that. All of that effectively is encrypted stuff happening over the internet for the most part, which is pretty accessible for nation states to be able to gather. And there's lots of those things that will still be, of interest. Network diagrams and all sorts of IP for various products and inventions and so forth. All of that will still be very valuable 5 years or more from now. So there's plenty of things that would be of extreme value in the future that are being sent around. I'm probably less myself worried about passwords, because you're right, they do change. And hopefully people are using two-factor auth and things like that. There's lots of ways to get people's passwords that don't involve quantum computing, right? Phishing is the number one attack vector for most the initial toehold for most breaches. And so until we solve that problem, that's going to be the easiest way to get passwords. But it's this other the other data and things that people are trying to get at with these breaches, of those things that are being sent over the internet, or even if I do get inside of a network and I get access to a bunch of data, but it is still encrypted, I can still store that, and as long as it's encrypted with RSA or ECC.
I wonder too, so let's say I'm a I don't know. Let's say I'm either a government organization or a business that is, a priority target for this, and so and I'm aware of it, and I say, okay, you know what, I'm going to start doing stuff now to embrace PQC and move to new controls.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's always that possibility/probability of missing a low-level machine. Like, I'm going to focus over here, I'm going to do all these things, and I'm going to fix everything, and then there's going to be this one Achilles heel still out there on the network somewhere, and that could still let someone get in through the back door.
Yeah, no, there is actually, and I think if you look at SHA-1 to SHA-2 is probably the best example of a recent algorithmic changeover that we have. There's a lag time between the time the standards come out, and then vendors like us begin frantically implementing against those standards to make sure we have compliant implementations of all the new algorithms. That then those things need to get built into products and operating systems, and you need a new version of Windows that has the support for those algorithms, new version of Apple iOS and every other software and firmware. Really anything that communicates on your network is going to have to change, and that takes quite a while. You're right. I think there's really a couple things. There's the when you think about things like PKI, right? I can't put a quantum resistant certificate on a web server if I still have things that are connecting to that don't understand the new algorithm, right? Or I'm just going to break things, which is even worse. So I think that's the other piece of this is organizations really have to pay attention. That one of the things we stress is you can't really start deploying these algorithms today, right? Probably maybe sometime next year you're going to start seeing vendors that will have support for this stuff. We certainly will by the end of this year, beginning of next. We spend a lot of time talking with our vendor community, ourselves, the HSM vendors, all of those folks, even some of our competitors, to make sure that our stuff will interoperate and kind of timelines that they're tracking to. But by and large, most IT organizations really can't start until there's a version of OSs and other things that would make use of these algorithms. But you really also have to pay attention to what in your organization can change and what things can't, right? What are the things you can do now are things like get an inventory of what do I have, what is it using, what things are talking to which things, so I can actually know which things I could update and which things will break if I do an update, and that sort of thing. And also just coming up with that plan of like, okay, once I can start deploying this stuff, what can I do? What can I do first? What things won't be able to move? I think that's, there's still organizations dealing with SHA-1 in their environments because there's a legacy, situation, right? The hospital environments often have legacy things. Plant floor, that's probably the biggest one. There's a stamping machine running, Windows XP. No, we can't update it. The company went out of business 3 years ago, but this thing's critical to our output, and so like you got to figure out a way to deal with that. All that kind of stuff is, even if, like you said, you might miss things. In some cases, you might be well aware, but you still can't do anything about it. So like that, that's part of that plan of an algorithmic transition.
Right. It's a little bit like, yeah. I was gonna say it's a little bit like the challenge with IoT security as well. Like there's a lot of IoT devices that they don't have a UI. There is no way to install a security software on top of it, and you at least need to be aware of it so that you can put some other mitigating control in front of it. You can say, okay, great, I can't protect that directly, but I can still put something in between it and the network, so that I can protect it.
Yeah, I think another good point to stress there actually is because we have seen some customers run into this, and even just some of the breaches and things. Sometimes it's not the IoT device that you have to worry about protecting, right? It's the thing that the IoT device connects to. So because the most common IoT pattern is I've manufactured something, it's sitting somewhere and it's phoning back in, phoning back home. If that thing can only use legacy cryptography, that means that whatever backend component that thing is talking to needs to accept legacy cryptography, and that's inside your internal network, right? So a lot of those controls that you described might actually have to go inside your environment to kind of wall that off.
Right.
We absolutely have folks that they've built hard-coded SHA-1 roots of trust into things that the risk is to the back end of having in perpetuity having to trust something pretending to be one of these devices and getting access to your network and then going from there. And there are breaches. The casino was hacked by someone pretending to be a fish tank heater.
Yep.
I think it was Home Depot that was a long time ago now, but the inroad there was masquerading as an HVAC system component. So that sort of model absolutely can happen. So we do. It's fun. We very much try to preach this idea of crypto agility, and I think that's the other big takeaway from this is this isn't going to wind up just being about switching from RSA to ML, which is one of the new post-cryptographic standards, because there's actually multiple algorithms that have been standardized, and NIST is going to be standardizing even more of them. And there's some reasons for that. Some of it's the math is newer, that they're kind of hedging their bets on the idea that one of these might get compromised. We might have to switch again. And so, I think, just seeing even from the SHA-1 to SHA-2 examples that we've been talking about, like even though it's hard to make a constrained IoT device updatable in terms of its roots of trust and and entity certificates and algorithms that it uses and so forth, doesn't absolve you from the fact that some of these attacks may exist against those things. And so where possible, if you can design in the ability to change things, even if it's a firmware update or something else that change those things out, it can save you a lot of time and effort, especially if these things are out in the field for a long period of time. If it's disposable IoT, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're designing for IoT scenarios, vehicles, heavy machinery, the hospital stuff that we were talking about, all of that sort of thing. These things are very durable. They're around forever. you can no longer allow yourself to be surprised by the fact that some algorithm that you're using is insecure, because we now know, even with SHA-1 to SHA-2, that will happen, and so it's just something that has to be designed for or planned for in some way.
Right. Well, so first of all, I was going to say I wanted to kind of draw the parallel of some of what you described. I was going to say, like, I've experienced that even on a personal consumer level when it comes to like Wi-Fi standards and Wi-Fi encryption. Where it's like, we went from WEP to WPA to WPA2, etc. And then so you go get the new thing and you say, okay, well, now I've got a new wireless router and it does WPA2, so I'm good. And what a lot of people didn't realize at the time is like, well, no, your WPA2 is still going to fall back to WPA1 when it's connecting to a device that doesn't have WPA2. So like you're still vulnerable because most of your stuff is still using the bad algorithm.
Yep. Yeah. And that's very much, that will absolutely happen with post-quantum transition things too, right? That you have to not only make sure that the stuff you're deploying is capable of it, but that it's actually configured and in practice is using the new algorithms.
And it's not easy necessarily.
No,
like,
it's not.
Even like right now, we went from Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6, and I've got new wireless routers in my house that are, the current state of the art. They're capable of doing like 10 gig, wireless or whatever. It's like, yes, but my incoming internet connection is only 1 gig in the first place. None of the devices that are connecting to this network in my house are capable of that. So it's kind of a useless technology to me, but it's there, and it's just that, I guess my point is just that I would need my incoming connection and my internet provider gateway and my wireless router and the switch that's pulling everything around my house and all of the devices connecting to all be capable of this of the latest version in order for it to work.
And now, hopefully people have an idea of why this transition is going to be so painful, right? Because it's all of those things that have to move together to some extent. I guess the one thing I would say, there is some really interesting work going on with the X9 standards group. That's mostly financial organizations that come together and work on various standards. One of the things that they're actually putting out as a standard is an idea of a hybrid certificate. So obviously this is more of a PKI thing than, we're not, we do PKI, machine identity and that sort of thing. We're not naive enough to think that is the entire sum of all things that have to transition to post-quantum, but it certainly is a big chunk of it. One of the things that they're doing actually is this hybrid certificate idea is basically, imagine if you know how X509 certificates work, imagine a regular standard X509 certificate signed by RSA or ECC, but inside of a non-critical extension is a signature with a quantum resistant algorithm. And what you basically then have is something that for the legacy stuff that, anything, if you were to deploy that certificate in an environment today, they would just consume that as a standard RSA certificate or ECC certificate with this big chunk of data inside that it doesn't understand, but that's okay because it's marked as non-critical. But things that do understand that will actually use the quantum resistant signature, either instead or in addition to. I guess there's a question of if the RSA signature doesn't match, you probably want to know that too and probably not trust it. That becomes a way then, I think that will actually push, because like we were talking about in general, like you can't start really deploying these algorithms in your environment until you get this critical mass of all the things that communicate together that understand it. Something like the hybrid certificates could actually move that forward a little bit where, if anything understands those, I could actually deploy like a hybrid root, hybrid PKI, and start putting I actually could put a certificate on a web server that had, signed by both. And then as I update my environment, more and more of it becomes quantum resistant, but I can actually start that transition sooner than having to wait. So that's a kind of interesting thing that that the X9 folks are working on. What we've seen is we and a lot of the other. We're not a public CA, but we talk to a lot of public CAs. A lot of them are actually doing, looking at implementing support for that sort of thing as well, for this exact reason. It allows you to kind of move your, at least some of your, it won't move the finish line forward, but it moves your starting line of actual quantum deployment forward, which is a good thing.
Okay. All right. Well, so one of the things I wanted to make sure we make mention of is you guys have the Tech Days 2025 coming up in March. Where is that going on? Miami?
That's in Miami. Yeah, Miami in March. So those of us that live in the northern climates, that will still be a welcome time to
Yes.
to leave the frozen north. But yeah, we're really excited about that. It's very much a with a bent towards sort of deep security conversations. We typically have folks involved with the standards bodies that are actually on the front lines of implementing and standardizing and deploying a lot of this technology, both quantum resistant. Obviously, that'll be a big part of it, but it won't be the only thing. But it's a really exciting conference, and yeah, I think I've seen some of. I don't think we can announce too many of the speakers yet, although there is. If you look on our website to some of our marketing content, I know the chairman. Miami's a big F1 city. The chairman of the Haas F1 team, as far as security and IT for the F1 racing team, will actually be one of the keynote speakers. I think there's I've seen a lot of other folks that are in the mix as far as being able to participate. I don't think there's as many of them that we can announce yet, but it will be a very exciting list of speakers, and a lot of just, it's a lot of, just great minds at, some of the biggest organizations in the world coming together and just talking about all of this stuff. So,
well, I mean, I pulled up the site. I mean, listed under speakers. I mean, you've got Gary Foote from the Haas F1 team.
Yeah. Okay.
Got a lot of Keyfactor people. Dimitris Zakharopoulos from Haraka.
Yeah. Public CA. Yeah.
We've got Santander Bank, TruePick, M&T Bank, Chainloop. I mean, so there's a lot of good speakers here, a lot of good businesses represented. So
great, and more announcements to come. So as we get the agenda solidified. So
and it's in Miami, so I assume there will be pina coladas or something too.
Lots of umbrella drinks and good conversation, and yeah, I mean, what better than post-quantum cryptography conversations and umbrella drinks, right? There's only a few places you can actually do that. So.
All right. Well, I want to thank you. I mean, it was interesting because as much as I think I know more than most people, but or at least more than I don't know most, more than a lot of people about these things. But I think some of the ways you've explained it really kind of level set it for me as well. Because again, I've just heard the sky is falling version forever,
right.
And hadn't actually heard anyone say, describe it the way you did of, hey, even if we had a quantum computer tomorrow, it doesn't make our existing computers obsolete. It's like a purpose-built thing that does what it does very well in a way that breaks some things, but it doesn't replace everything.
Right. Yeah, and it does a lot of good as well. It's funny, cause we spend all this time in cryptography and security focused on the bad things that quantum computing will do, but there are a lot of really good things. I actually was at an event last night, and someone mentioned, there's hospitals actually looking at quantum computing to help do diagnoses sooner, and there's a lot of really great things that will come from quantum computing, but we have to shore up this cryptography thing. And yeah, I mean, I would say the sky's not falling, but we don't have very much time to make a transition. Right. And we have way less time than we did with SHA-1 to SHA-2. And this is by far a more complicated change. So it's not falling, but we got a lot of work to do.
Well, and that's also is something I've gained from this conversation is the comparison to SHA-1, SHA-2, because the example I have used consistently is Y2K. I keep talking about how we knew that was coming for like 30 years, and everyone waited until 1999, to start scrambling. And I'm like, this is a situation where you don't want to wait until 2029 and then figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah, I will say it's kind of funny. So, and I have to give credit to David Hook for saying this. So, David is actually we're the caretakers of the open source Bouncy Castle encryption libraries, which of course very front and center. That's where our implementations of all these new algorithmic standards are going. But David, when people bring up Y2K comparisons for this, his answer I thought was kind of interesting, because those of us who are really around for Y2K remember, there was this huge scramble to do all this stuff, and there was a lot of skies falling sort of things. And then when we actually got to January 1st of 2000, there was certainly a sentiment of like, well, it didn't seem to be that big a deal. Like, was it actually a big threat or not? Or did we just do a really good job of ultimately preparing? And David's response is sort of, he said, I hope that's what happens with Q Day, as they're calling it, of that people do a lot of work and it goes so smoothly that everybody wonders if it was actually a real thing. But I don't. Yeah, I guess there's some similarities to the whole Y2K thing. There's some that are very different, right? That was a very set day. It's much more nebulous. But it's going to come down to me, that's the thing. The real reason why people are going to switch is because of compliance, because they have to for compliance. Right. And that's fine. Like, I don't care why people switch, but they do need to, or else it will become a problem when a quantum computer does exist.
Right, and it's going to become a problem for you from a compliance perspective. It's going to become a problem for you whether it's a real problem or not.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was going to say too that what describing Y2K that way is kind of the paradox of cybersecurity in general. I mean, when I was working in the trenches and stuff, I was EDS and I was working with like General Motors and stuff. And when it would come time to you're at the end of your contract and you need to re-up, and they kind of shrug their shoulders and be like, I don't know, nothing's really happened. Like, why are we paying you guys? I'm like, nothing happened because you paid us.
If you do a perfect job, people will wonder if they even needed you. Yeah, right. You're right. That is a paradox.
Why did we do all this?
Right.
So yeah. So yeah, it's the paradox of if you do your job right, then it seems like you're not necessary.
Yep. Yeah, but that is I think that's in general, especially with quantum, it's very hard to get your board of directors concerned about this very deep nebulous threat that's still 5 years out, when there are absolutely security things there are fires burning right now that are more urgent, inarguably more urgent, right? But failure to prepare for the other one, it's like it's a distant thing. It's catastrophic if it happened today. It's going to take a long time to repair. That's a difficult thing to get folks energized about. And I guess although I will say we've seen government customers absolutely very much, they talk to us all the time about that. Large financial organizations absolutely talk to us all the time. Telcos also. The rest of our even large customers, in retail and other things, are kind of keeping an eye on it, but not really doing much about it. But I think it will come back to compliance has a benefit. I mean, no one, at least I don't know very many people who enjoy going through compliance audits, but they do have the benefit of turning more distant, nebulous threats into issues that need to be addressed more urgently in the present. And I think in that sense, it's a good thing.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me. And like I say, it was a good conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks, Tony.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow @TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions that you'd like to see answered in future posts.